You've got a farmer who's got a 500 horsepower tractor, broadacre farming. You could actually give him a 1,000 horsepower tractor and make the farming more efficient. It's not quite as simple as that, but what I'm trying to explain is that whereas some countries need lots and lots of people to work in factories making lots and lots of little gadgets, Australia's not that country and probably will never be that way again. Now, in closing, I ask you, what is one of the major advantages we identify as Australians? I believe it's big country, small population. We identify with the fact that we've got wide open spaces. Of course, we're an arid country. If you read the wonderful book Overloading Australia, it will tell you that the total rivers in Australia don't add up to the flow of the Mississippi in the United States. If you fly from New York across the United States, you get to Denver, 2/3 of the way across the United States, and you're in rich farming land. Right? Do the same in Australia and get to Dubbo, and you start to go into more arid and marginal country. We are a very different country to the United States. We're an arid country. We all live clinging to the coast because we love it. What I find, there's a double whammy when you increase population. I've seen it here. Our productive farming land being covered with houses. Now imagine this, you need more people. We have more people, so we need more food, but we then build the houses on the farming land. If you go down to Kiama, the beautiful productive dairy land is now covered by houses. And so, people like to claim if we increase our population by 50%, 60% or 100%, that we'll be able to improve the productivity of our farmland and our crops. No one actually knows, but the experts who have spoken to me say it's very unlikely. It's likely to go the other way. Now, the other thing I'm going to say is, why? Everyone talks about growth, but what is the advantage? When our Prime Minister said, I am for a big Australia, I welcome 36 million, did he say because this is the advantage it's going to give us? No, he didn't. Because, in fact, it's growing. Our country's growing just because it's growing, because nobody has a plan. Nobody is game to have a plan, because one case they link it to racism, which it's got nothing to do with. Kelvin Thompson, a very responsible Labor backbencher, that's probably why he's a backbencher, he said his plan is that if we wanted to decrease our immigration from a huge 280,000 per year to 70,000 per year, which would still be high compared to our population in comparable countries, and then if we don't go around encouraging Australian families to have one for dad, one for one mum and one for the country, but just said, look, until we know whether we'll have enough food for your kids to eat at the end of their life, it's probably a better idea not to have too many kids until we have that information. And I reckon most Aussie families will say, good point, we don't want to be responsible for something, so our grandchildren say in 80 years' time, look, my grandparents must have known this was going to happen. Why didn't they do something about it? Now, our politicians rarely lead, but we can tell them that we want a proper plan on population, not just out of control growth until we run out of resources. And we need to stop being scared of a national debate on population. We need to get our government to fund a proper scientific study. We have the scientists, we have the experts to tell us what the sustainable limit of our country is in population. And there's going to be a figure. We need a high side and a low side, because many of the changes due to climate change we don't know. So we want our scientists to be able to tell us, look, if we have the minimum effect by climate change and we can somehow get the carbon footprint down and we can not decrease the productive efficiency of our crops too much, this is the figure we can hold. if the worst case scenario is so many Australians. And I know, using my aviation scenario, where the risk is great of a catastrophe, you are very conservative. And if we were very conservative with our population, believe it or not, it would make it better for just about every Australian except Rupert Murdoch, a few of my capitalist mates and myself, but believe it or not, we can still exist with a bit less. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Dick. We've got time for some questions, but there's a lot of people here, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions. So there's 2 roving mics will be floating around. There's a couple of rules for the questions tonight. We need some rules if we're going to govern our country, and we certainly need some rules if we're govern the following conversation. So the rule is this: questions are questions, and comments are not. So if you have a question, we would all be very interested to hear what Dick has in reply to your question. And if you have a comment, then you should stick around and make it to other people afterwards tonight. So I will be a little bit rude if you're rude enough to ignore what I just said. So please, questions. Now, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to take them in little batches of 3, just so we can get through a few more. So pressure's on you to be concise in your questions, and then up to Dick how long he wants to spend responding to them. So, Josh, there was a hand up in the middle there. Yep. So just hold on 1 second, and Serena, just up the back. Yep. So we'll take those 2 questions first.
Can I just ask if it's possible, if we can have the questions one at a time? See, okay. I'm a simple car radio installer, and 1 question I can get, 2 questions, maybe 3 normally wipe the whole lot out. So maybe 1 question at a time, if you don't mind. By the way, can I just ask you something? I've given what people would call a controversial speech, that we should have a plan for population in Australia. If you agree with me, put up your hand. Yeah, amazing. And do you know what? We've got a standing room only crowd. 9 out of 10 people I speak to have a totally different view to our Prime Minister. They have a real concern about population, mainly the fact that we don't have a plan.
Yep. Stay up here. Oh, stay up here. Okay, so the first question. Sorry, whilst you're ready.
The first question, so I can remember it.
In the early 70s, we got a grassroots movement going right across Australia. We found out that the pollies were not interested, as you've mentioned. Now, what has to happen to get them interested this time? We obtained rooms with more than 400 people in, and they all put up their hand, but no action. Pollies didn't want to know about it.
Right, I think there's a big difference now, and that, believe it or not, is climate change. It's quite interesting, because if you went out and you spoke to our politicians, they all say they're concerned about climate change. Look at that extraordinary conference in Copenhagen. Tens of millions of dollars was spent, and I have no doubt that any sensible politician, that might be difficult, but every sensible politician has a concern about climate change. You can't have a concern about climate change if you believe it's induced by human beings without then being concerned about our population levels. So what I think's happening is our environment, our world is crying out and saying too much. It's starting to correct itself. Now, we can let that happen and end up with billions of people starving. I'm told that at the present time there are 1 billion people on this earth, these are United Nations figures, that don't have enough to eat now. Well, we're also told by the climate change experts that in the places that count, the crop yield will go down by something like 17%. You only have to add the 2 together to know that what's going to go on. So what's happened now is our politicians have a concern for the first time. As long as we link the 2 together, I believe you're going to get some action. The other thing is that I think I'm probably a good example, that I remember back in the 70s people talking about population and Paul Ehrlich claiming that people would starve and so forth. It didn't happen. You get slack and you don't think about it. Now